They laughed at him. They mocked his silence. But when Whoopi Goldberg tried to joke about Keanu Reeves live on The Views, he didn't fight back. He didn't lash out. Instead, he said something so honest, so raw. The entire room fell silent. And what he said next changed everything. This is the story of calm in the face of cruelty, and the silence that echoed louder than any applause. The sun rose over New York City like any other day, but inside the studios of ABC's The View something was brewing. It wasn't controversy, not yet. It was anticipation. A kind of electric buzz that only happened when a rare guest appeared on the schedule. Today's name was unusual. Not a politician. Not a pop star. Not a gossip-fueled actor. It was Keanu Reeves. For the producers, it was a win. Keanu didn't often do daytime interviews, and certainly not talk shows known for their high-tempo chatter and bold opinions. But this time, he had agreed. Maybe because the film he was promoting was deeply personal. A story of grief, resilience, and quiet strength. The studio staff hustled. Lights were tested. Makeup was refreshed. Chairs were arranged in the signature semicircle. Backstage, the co-hosts flipped through their cards and sipped coffee. In the corner, Keanu sat alone. Dressed in a modest black suit with no tie, his posture was composed, his expression unreadable. He wasn't scrolling through his phone. He wasn't chatting with his publicist. He was just present. That presence, still, gentle, yet oddly commanding, was part of what made Keanu so different. Joy Behar noticed it first. She leaned over and whispered to Whoopi Goldberg, who was applying some final dabs of foundation in the mirror. "He doesn't talk much, huh?" Joy asked. Whoopi gave a small chuckle. "He's got that monk energy," she said. "Like a guy who'd be completely fine if the world ended as long as he had a motorcycle and a mountain." The other co-hosts laughed. When the cameras went live and the crowd burst into applause, Keanu walked out with a nod and a soft smile. No waving hands. No exaggerated gestures. Just a man who'd lived through more pain than most and still found the courage to show up with grace. He sat in the middle chair, directly across from Whoopi. "Keanu," Joy began cheerfully, "welcome to The View. You've been away from the spotlight a bit, and now you're back with this new film. Tell us about it." Keanu looked at her with thoughtful eyes and spoke slowly. "It's called Stillness. It's about a man who loses everything, and instead of chasing the world to fix him, he chooses silence. Reflection. He rebuilds from within." The audience clapped. It was the kind of answer you didn't hear often on daytime television. Whoopi leaned forward. "You always talk like that, don't you?" she asked with a grin. "Like you're writing a poem in your head while the rest of us are stuck in traffic." Laughter rippled across the audience. Keanu smiled, but said nothing. "There's something about you," Joy added. "Like you know a secret the rest of us forgot." "Maybe I just enjoy the silence," Keanu replied gently. The hosts nodded, smiling. The mood stayed light. But there was an undercurrent, something just beneath the surface. Whoopi wasn't finished. "You know what you remind me of?" she said, turning to the crowd. "He's like a wise monk who forgot how to laugh." More laughter. Keanu's eyes dropped briefly to the floor. Then back up. No anger. No sharp comeback. Just that same composed stillness. Sunny Hostin shifted in her seat, sensing something unspoken. "I think you're just thoughtful. And that's rare." Whoopi shrugged. "Nothing wrong with a little teasing. We joke around. That's what we do." And yet, in that moment, something shifted. Not in Keanu. In the room. The audience, usually quick to laugh, held their breath a bit longer. Keanu sat up straighter, his hands still resting calmly in his lap. The invitation was to promote a movie. But now, unintentionally, the invitation was something else. A test. What do you do when someone mocks you in public? When the world watches to see if you'll break your silence? Keanu Reeves didn't flinch. He didn't frown. He waited. He had lived through more than most people in that studio would ever understand. But he wasn't about to let that pain turn him bitter. He was quiet. Not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to choose grace. The segment moved forward, but the air in the room had changed. And so had the eyes of the audience. They weren't just watching an actor anymore. They were watching a man who lived by a different code. One that would soon be tested, more than anyone expected. The conversation moved on, but not really. Beneath the polished surface of television smiles and practiced transitions, something had begun to simmer. A tension. Unseen by some, felt by many. Keanu spoke about his film with quiet passion. He described the character's journey through solitude, the beauty of healing without noise, and how real strength comes from listening, not reacting. Joy nodded along. Sunny asked a sincere follow-up about emotional vulnerability in men. Even Sarah Haynes offered a compliment, calling his performance deep and haunting. But Whoopi sat back, arms folded. Her face unreadable. She wasn't convinced, or maybe she was, but wouldn't admit it. All right, she finally said, cutting into the flow with a wide grin. But can we just address the elephant in the room? Keanu turned to her, open, listening. You talk so slow, man, Whoopi continued. Like, I could take a nap between your sentences. Laughter. A few loud chuckles from the back row. It was meant to be funny. That kind of classic roast TV lives for. But something in the delivery made it different. A little too sharp. A little too personal. Keanu blinked slowly. He gave a soft exhale but didn't interrupt. Whoopi leaned in again. I'm serious. I watched the first 5 minutes of your movie and thought my TV froze. You just sat there, staring into space. More laughter. A producer off-camera gave the wrap-it-up signal. But Whoopi wasn't finished. I mean, Buddha's got nothing on you. You're like Buddha, if he never cracked a smile. The studio erupted again, but the energy was no longer comfortable. Keanu sat still. His fingers gently pressed together, resting in his lap. He didn't look away. He didn't break eye contact. Finally, after a few seconds of silence, the kind that stretches on live television like an eternity, he spoke. It's all right, he said quietly. Humor is important. I just try to be mindful with my words, because I've seen what careless ones can do. There it was. Not a rebuttal. Not a retort. A reminder. The audience shifted. Arms crossed. Legs uncrossed. A woman in the front row frowned. Joy looked sideways at Whoopi. Sunny raised her eyebrows. Even the band in the corner seemed unsure whether to cue music or let the moment breathe. Keanu continued, gently. When you've lost people, really lost them, and you've sat in silence for hours because you didn't know how to fill the emptiness, you stop being in a rush to speak. Whoopi's smile faded slightly. Her eyes flicked away, just for a second. I don't speak slowly, Keanu added. I speak deliberately. The audience didn't laugh. This time they clapped. Slowly. Then louder. He wasn't angry. He wasn't offended. He was resolute. The moment, once meant to entertain, had transformed into something else entirely. A live lesson in grace. And as the applause continued, Whoopi realized, maybe for the first time, she wasn't the center of this story anymore. Keanu was. But not because he stole the spotlight. Because he earned it, by refusing to fight for it. The applause faded, but something heavier remained in the air, an emotional weight that pressed against the studio lights, the painted smiles, and even the teleprompters. Keanu adjusted slightly in his seat. Not to reclaim space. Not to assert himself. But to lean in. To offer something. He glanced at Whoopi, not with spite, not even discomfort, just understanding. You know, he said gently, I wasn't always like this. The audience quieted even more. It was no longer an interview. It was confession. There was a time, he continued, when I laughed easily, spoke fast, filled every silence. But life, it humbles you. The other co-hosts leaned in, visibly moved. I had a best friend, River, Keanu said. He was everything I wasn't, loud, joyful, brilliant. We did our first big film together. And then one night, he was gone. A hush fell over the studio. No one dared shift in their seats. A few years later, I fell in love. She was kind, fierce, had the most beautiful laugh. We had a daughter, But she was stillborn. And not long after, I lost her too. Gasps echoed softly across the audience. Even Whoopi's face had changed. That much grief, Keanu said, changes how you speak. How you sit. How you breathe. You don't rush anymore. You don't chase noise. You hold on to silence, because sometimes it's the only place where pain can breathe. The cameras kept rolling. No one cut to commercial. No jokes. No clever transitions. Just Keanu, sitting calmly beneath the weight of his own truth. And in that stillness, he offered something rare. I don't want pity, he added. I just want people to understand. When someone seems quiet, it doesn't mean they're empty. It might mean they're full of stories they're still learning how to carry. A single clap rang out. Then another. And then the studio erupted, not in laughter this time, but in something deeper. Respect. Keanu nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging their shared humanity. Whoopi didn't speak. Not yet. Her eyes were locked on him, and something behind them was shifting. For years, she'd been the center of the storm. The voice. The sharp tongue. The one who cut through awkward moments with a punchline. But in front of Keanu, there were no jokes left to tell. Just a man who had every reason to be bitter, but chose grace instead. After a moment, Joy reached out and lightly touched Keanu's arm. That's incredibly brave to share, she said. Thank you. Keanu looked at her and smiled. A real one. Small. But genuine. I don't think it's brave, he said. I think it's just honest. And with that, he leaned back. The story was told. Not to impress. Not to defend. But simply to be known. And now, the world was listening. The studio lights didn't change, but the atmosphere felt entirely different now. Something had cracked open, not in Keanu, but in the room itself. The co-hosts weren't reaching for their cue cards anymore. No one was scrambling for the next talking point. Everyone was still processing what they had just heard. Keanu Reeves, the quiet man of Hollywood, had just laid bare a lifetime of grief with more honesty and dignity than a dozen tell-all memoirs. Whoopi sat still, unusually so. Her arms, once folded defensively, now rested loosely on her lap. Her gaze dropped for a moment. She cleared her throat, trying to find her place again. I didn't mean to, she started, then stopped. The words weren't coming easily, and that was new. She finally looked up and said, I was just teasing. You know, it's kind of what we do around here. Keanu gave her the smallest of nods. I know. But his voice wasn't cold. It wasn't defensive. It was kind. Unshaken. That's what made it even more powerful. I think what caught me off guard, he added, was how quickly we laugh at quiet. There it was again. No bitterness. Just truth. I think we've been taught that stillness means something's wrong with someone, Keanu said. But sometimes, stillness is the most courageous thing we have. A few audience members murmured in agreement. You could feel it. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been misunderstood for being quiet, calm, or simply different. Whoopi leaned back in her chair. She looked not like a host anymore, but a student, hearing something she hadn't considered before. That's fair, she admitted. I guess. I didn't know your story. Most people don't, Keanu replied. That's okay. I'm not here for sympathy. I'm just here to tell the truth. Joy Behar jumped in, sensing the emotional weight and trying to balance it. Honestly, Keanu, I think you've just said more in 5 minutes than most people say in an hour-long interview. Sunny nodded beside her. You reminded us that everyone's carrying something, and we should be a little more careful with our jokes. The audience clapped again. Not the loud, rowdy kind of clap that follows a punchline. This was different. It was slower, more intentional, a standing ovation of the heart. Keanu bowed his head slightly in thanks, then looked at Whoopi again. You've made a lot of people laugh over the years, he said. I respect that. We all need laughter. Whoopi managed a small smile. Thanks. But sometimes, Keanu continued, what people need even more is to feel seen. The words hung in the air. They didn't land like a punch. They landed like a truth someone had waited years to say. And in that moment, the power in the room shifted again. Not because Keanu had silenced Whoopi. Not because he won an argument. But because he spoke with something that's rarely seen on TV anymore, grace under fire. It wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a moment of transformation. And it wasn't just for Whoopi. It was for everyone watching, in the studio, at home, or years later on a screen, searching for something real in a world that rarely gives it. The segment wrapped. The show went to commercial. And just like that, the cameras cut away. But the moment hadn't ended. Not for Whoopi. Not for Keanu. And certainly not for the studio audience, who lingered in their seats longer than usual, quiet, contemplative, almost reverent. Backstage, the mood was equally still. No one rushed to pull Keanu aside. No swarm of handlers. No press. Just him, calmly walking the hallway toward the exit with the same quiet grace he had carried into the building. Then a voice called out behind him. Keanu. He turned. It was Whoopi. She wasn't holding her usual confident posture. Her hands were in her coat pockets, eyes scanning the floor before meeting his gaze. Can I talk to you for a second? Of course, Keanu said. She took a breath. That breath said everything. Years of showbiz, ego, control, all of it softened in that one exhale. I've been doing this a long time, she said. And I've teased a lot of people. Most take it. Some laugh. A few fire back. But I've never had someone disarm me like that. Keanu smiled, gently. I didn't mean to disarm you. I know, she said. That's what made it hit harder. There was a pause between them. Not awkward, honest. Like the silence that falls between two people who finally see each other clearly. When I was younger, Whoopi continued, my defense was always humor. Make the joke first. Get the laugh. Beat them to the punch. That's how I survived. Keanu nodded. I get it. But today, you made me realize, maybe we don't always need to beat people to the punch, she said. Maybe we just need to ask what kind of battle they've already fought before walking in. Her voice cracked slightly. It wasn't for show. There were no cameras here. Keanu's tone didn't change. He didn't offer some grand forgiveness. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. I've made a lot of mistakes in silence, he said. So I don't judge others for what they say out loud. Whoopi chuckled softly, wiping a corner of her eye. You're something else, you know that? Just a guy who's seen a few things, he replied. She reached out her hand. He shook it, firm but kind. Thanks for today, Whoopi said. You gave me something to think about. And you gave me something to smile about, Keanu replied. That Buddha line. Pretty clever. She laughed. Really laughed this time. Not the performance kind. The kind that heals a little on the way out. They parted ways. No headlines were written about the moment backstage. No one posted it to Twitter. But it was real. And in a world full of noise, real was rare. Later that night, Whoopi posted a short message on her personal Instagram. No jokes. No punchlines. Today I met someone who reminded me that silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes, it's full of more wisdom than words can ever carry. Thank you, Keanu, for your story, and your stillness. The post went viral. But more importantly, it made people reflect. Not on scandal. Not on gossip. But on how we treat each other when no one's watching. And as Keanu quietly exited the studio that day, into a car with no entourage and no flashing lights, he left behind more than a soundbite. He left behind a lesson. One that would stay with everyone who witnessed it. By the next morning, clips from the show had spread across the internet like wildfire. But it wasn't the usual kind of viral. There was no outrage. No scandal. No gotcha moment. What went viral was the silence. The silence that fell in the studio when Keanu spoke from the heart. The silence that came after Whoopi's last joke. The silence of a man who didn't defend himself with anger, but with truth. Social media lit up. That man speaks like a river, slow, deep, and strong. Keanu didn't clap back. He stood still, and the whole room sat down. This is how you handle public disrespect. With grace. With strength. With soul. Millions rewatched the moment. But they weren't watching Whoopi. They weren't even watching The View. They were watching Keanu, and how stillness, when rooted in pain and wisdom, could become the most powerful presence in the room. Later that week, Keanu was asked about the incident in a brief interview. Just a few words. That's all he gave. Sometimes, people try to pull noise out of you. But peace is a choice. And I choose it. That was it. No rant. No drama. Just peace. And people felt it. Because in a world obsessed with reaction, he chose reflection. In a culture that rewards outrage, he offered stillness. Where others would have tried to win, he didn't even play. Back at The View, things changed, subtly, but meaningfully. In the next few episodes, the jokes were a little softer. The interruptions were fewer. The co-hosts gave more space for real conversation. Because one man had reminded them, not every moment needs to be filled. Sometimes, it's what you don't say that teaches the most. As for Whoopi, she didn't speak much about it again. But those who watched closely could see it in her. A quiet shift. A deeper respect. And Keanu, he kept doing what he always does. Living. Listening. Choosing kindness. Not because it's easy, but because he knows what the other side feels like. He knows what it costs to carry pain, and how powerful it is to meet pain with dignity. The world will always mock what it doesn't understand. But every once in a while, someone responds with such quiet power, it forces the world to stop, think, and listen. That day on The View wasn't about a celebrity being mocked. It was about a human being choosing compassion in the face of public ridicule. And that's what made everyone go silent. Before you scroll away, pause. Because what Keanu did on that stage wasn't just a moment, it was a message. In a world that rewards loud voices and quick comebacks, he chose silence. He chose humility. He chose strength without shouting. If that moved you, if it reminded you of the power of staying true to who you are, even when the world laughs, then do this. Like this video if you believe silence can be stronger than noise. Comment below what would you have said if you were in Keanu's place. Subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines. Stories that inspire strength, grace, and humanity. Because the world doesn't need more outrage. It needs more people like Keanu.